Tayo po ay na-scam sa pamamagitan ng libu-libong acknowledgement receipts na basta-basta lamang dinoktor or gawa-gawa lamang. Mr. Chair, pero hindi po dyan nagtatapos ang mga kababalaghan ang nakikita natin sa acknowledgement receipts. Mr. Chair, it is also these representations. It's my privilege and honor, Mr. Chair, to introduce to you sina Miss Sally at si Miss Sheila. Magkakaibang pangalan po ito, Mr. Chair, at malamang magkakaibang tao. Kaya nga po sila magkaibang pangalan. Pero ano po ang kapansin-pansin, Mr. Chair? At ano ang napapansin natin rito sa pinipirmang acknowledgement receipts nila from DepEd as seen on the screen? Isa lang po ang pirma nila. Isa lang po ang pirma nila.
Magandang araw mga kabida. Welcome back sa ating channel. Magkakaiba ang pangalan pero pareho ang mga pirma. Yan nga ang mga isinuwalat ni Congressman Alonto Adjong sa kanyang report na ipresinta sa House of Representatives hearing nitong nakaraang linggo lamang. Samot-saring acknowledgement receipt nga ang ipinakita ng kongresista na nagpapakita ng mga milyon-milyong transaksyon ng pera ang nakalagay sa mga resibong ito na napunta sa mga pangalan ng mga ilang individual ayon sa pinapakita ng mga resibo. Ayon pa sa kongresista na na-scam ang mamamayang Pilipino sa pagnanakaw sa kaban ng bayan sa pamamagitan ng mga libu-libong acknowledgement receipts na basta na lamang dinoktor o gawa-gawa lamang Diumano ng OBP o Office of the Vice President. Narito ang mga naging pahayag.
Is Congressman Zia Alonto Adjong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Mr. Chairman and fellow members of this honorable committee, to my fellow Filipinos who are watching right now, what we have witnessed in the past 7 hearings before this Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability of the House of Representatives has left us with more questions than answers. Ang mga tanong po natin dito, hindi nakukuha ang kakulang sagot. Bagkus, nanganganak pa ng maraming tanong. But one thing, Mr. Chairman, is extremely clear to this representation. Tayo po ay na-scam sa pamamagitan ng libu-libong acknowledgement receipts na basta-basta lamang dinoktor or gawa-gawa lamang. Mr. Chair, almost 5,000 acknowledgement receipts of dubious origin, kapalit ang 612.5 million pesos na confidential funds na basta-basta lang naglaho mula sa kaban ng bayan sa ilalim ng pamumuno ng ating Vice Presidente. Mr. Chair, 612,500,000 pesos o mahigit kalahating bilyon. Mr. Chair, ito po ang pondo ng bayan na nawala o hindi ma-explain mula lamang December 2022 hanggang September 2023. 9 na buwan lamang po, Mr. Chairman. Sa ganitong halaga, halos budget na po ng isang buong ahensya para sa isang buong taon ang pinag-uusapan po dito. Pinaglaruan po tayo? Niloko ho ba tayo? O pinaglaruan po ang publiko pagdating sa kanilang pondo? Mr. Chairman, sa item 4.12 ng Joint Circular, ang requirement po sa government agencies na nagdi-disperse ng confidential funds is to submit documentary evidence of payment upon the liquidation at the end of the period for which it was allocated. These documents, Mr. Chairman, are to be submitted to the Intelligence and Confidential Fund Audit Unit of the Commission of Audit, who shall then audit these documents. In fact, upon the submission of the liquidation report to ICFAO, a certification signed by the head of agency and its Special Disbursement Officer, or SDO, stating that the expenses were incurred in connection with the agency's confidential expenses and activities with supporting documents and documentary evidence of payment is needed, Mr. Chairman. As the name suggests, evidence, ebidensya, is supposed to prove a fact. that the confidential funds were utilized for confidential expenses. Ang hindi dapat basta-basta lang ibinubulsa at hindi dapat lang, Mr. Chairman, dapat lang binubulsa o napupunta lang sa kung ano-anong gastusin. Mr. Chair, from among these documents, this committee discovered that the confidential funds, which should be utilized by civilian agencies for security and surveillance activities, was just handed over to 2 members of the Vice President's security team upon the instruction of the VP herself. Sinabi po ito ng kanyang Special Disbursement Officers na si Ms. Gina Acosta at Mr. Fajarda. Those funds, Mr. Chair, were never to be seen again. And according to the SDOs, these same 2 members of our security group supposedly just provided them with the acknowledgement receipts to be submitted to COA. Ibig sabihin po nito, Mr. Chair, para po mag-comply sa requirement na nag-submit ng documentary evidence of payment, ang binigay ng OVP at DepEd ay acknowledgement receipts lamang. But in the course of investigating the OVP and DepEd submissions to the COA, these acknowledgement receipts, which were supposedly submitted to prove that it actually utilized confidential funds for the purpose stated in its fiscal and financial plan, Mr. Chair, we uncovered a number of anomalies. Sabi ko nga po, ang tanong, nanganganak ng mas maraming tanong. Mukhang ang mga supposed evidence or proof of the use of these confidential funds ay bogus or gawa-gawa lamang. Fake no, ang tawag po sa English. These discoveries led us to the conclusion that something was really amiss, Mr. Chair. May mali na ang pagkakamali na ito ay humahantong po, Mr. Chairman, sa katiwalian. Under Joint Circular 2015-001, it states that confidential funds must be utilized during the period of the particular project. This was confirmed by a resource person, Attorney Gimora, who said during the November 20, 2024 hearing before this committee that she agreed that in relation to the submitted acknowledgement receipts for OVP's confidential funds in December 2022, these do not conform with the period that was covered by the confidential funds. Ito po yung kasagutan niya nung tinanong po siya ng ating kasamahan po dito, si Congressman Jill Bungalon. In the submitted acknowledgement receipts of the OVP to the COA, which as previously mentioned, it was supposedly a proof of its utilization of confidential funds from December 21 to December 31, 2022. And yet, we found numerous receipts which were dated outside of the period. Ibig sabihin, may mga resibuta po tayo dyan na hindi po within the prescribed o tinalagang dates kung saan nagkaroon po ng utilization ng confidential funds. Mr. Chairman, yung confidential funds na dinisburse po ng December 21 to December 31 of 2022 ay mayroon din pong resibo tayong natanggap na dated na bago pa man ito, Mr. Chair, may mga acknowledgement receipts po tayo na natanggap na ito ay ginasta bago pa man ng December 21, 2022 at mga ibang acknowledgement receipts na nagasta ng December 2023. Ang tanong ko po, Mr. Chairman, sa atin, paano naman ito mangyayari, Mr. Chair? Hindi rin po pwedeng sabihin na para sa ibang confidential funds ito na napasama lang. Because neither the OVP nor the Department of Education had any confidential funds prior to 21 December 2023, nor for December 2023. Wala naman po na confidential funds na binibigay or accordingly gagamitin or gagastahin nung prior, bago na December 21, 2023, at wala naman pong confidential funds na allotted for December of 2023. What are shown on the screen, Mr. Chair, are not just the only ones we found as based on our examination of the acknowledgement receipts. We also found, Mr. Chair, that more than 150 acknowledgement receipts representing payments which amounted to more than 24 million pesos. Mahirap pong paniwalaan, Mr. Chair, na typographical errors ito o nagkamali lang po sa PETSA. Masyado naman pong marami siguro itong mga typographical errors na ito because it amounts to 150 acknowledgement receipts. Further, in my experience, Mr. Chair, lahat naman ho tayo nagkakamali. Human error ang tawag po natin. Human error as to the writing of the dates would typically be that of the previous year and not of the succeeding year. Ibig sabihin, Mr. Chair, lahat naman ho tayo nagkakamali, lalo lang na pag mga bagong taon. Minsan, hindi pa ho natin masyadong yung acclimatize tayo doon sa pumasok na taon. Ang minsan na susulat po natin ay yung mga nakaraang taon. Hindi po yung preceding year. Na-experience po natin yan as sa human error. Na nagkakamali po tayo bearing the earlier year than the preceding year. Ibig sabihin po, Mr. Chair, hindi yung darating na taon ang may susulat po natin sa mga dokumentong pinipirmahan natin. In fact, Mr. Chair, in the OVP's response to the Audit Observation Memo number 2013-211 and 2013-213, dated 19 October 2023, in which the OVP attached the aforementioned acknowledgement receipts for its December 2022 confidential expenses, it stated that the amount of 125 million pesos was supposedly spent within the period. However, as I previously mentioned, Mr. Chair, a total of 158 acknowledgement receipts submitted by the OVP for its December 2023 confidential funds expenses were made outside the period of December 21 to December 31 of 2022. Contrary, Mr. Chair, to the statement of the OVP, Mr. Chair. These acknowledgement receipts were fabricated kasi wala nga po tayong basihan kung bakit ito nagastos. Wala nga ho siya doon sa date kung dapat siya paggastosan. Because they bore dates different from the period covered, Mr. Chair. Simple po yan. Very simple po yan at makikita po ng taong bayan yan. Para daw po sa 21 of December to 31 of December of 2022 raw po ang mga ARs na isinumite. This is shown by the certification dated 10 of January 2023 where Ms. Acosta certified that the acknowledgement receipts submitted, which was showed, we just showed, Mr. Chair, was for the period of December 21 to December 21 of 2022. Yung nakuha po ng OVP noong December 20, 2022. Pero po sa mga AR na ito, mayroong pong dalawa. Isa dated November 27, 2022 at isang dated December 12, Mr. Chair, 2022. Ito pong mga petsa na ito, it preceded the date with the confidential funds were released to the OVP in December 2022, while the others are dated in December 2022 or after the funds have been supposedly spent, Mr. Chair. Ang tanong ko po, paano po nangyari yon na meron po silang mga ARs dated prior to the actual releases of the confidential funds at may mga ARs sila dated na after supposedly na na-spent na yung kanilang confidential funds. Bali ho, Mr. Chair, mukhang base po sa sobrang dami ng mga acknowledgement receipts na ito na isinagawa lang noong hinihingan ng ebidensya ng COA sa pinadalang AOM sa Office of the Vice President. Sa aking palagay, Mr. Chair, ay itong panahon lang din na ito nagsimula gumawa ng mga ganitong klaseng acknowledgement receipts ang OVP para isumite. Para po, Mr. Chair, hindi magmukhang ginasta itong confidential expenses kung saan-saan lang po nila nilagay. Mr. Chair, it's very clear, Mr. Chair, kung titingnan po natin ng dates doon sa covered nung request of the confidential funds with that of the acknowledgement receipt na natanggap po natin, mukhang bogus po at fictitious po itong mga confidential funds, Mr. Chair. Wag din ho natin kakalimutan na by its very nature, Mr. Chair, acknowledgement receipts po ito. Ibig sabihin, pipirmahan mo ito tuwing natatanggap mo ang pera. Ibig po ba sabihin ito, Mr. Chair, mahigit 100 tao ang nagkamali na nagsabing December 2023 ang kanilang pinirman habang tinanggap nila ang pera para sa December 2022? Imposible naman po yan mangyari, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues. Let me go to another discovery that we noticed, Another anomaly this committee noticed was the use of a very unique ink in the shade of blue and several acknowledgement receipts mula po sa Office of the Vice President. At first glance, Mr. Chair, we found that these acknowledgement receipts, which supposedly were signed by different persons in different months, clearly have the same unique shade of blue ink. There are many different types of pens, Mr. Chair. Alam po natin yan. May fountain pens, may sign pens, or whatever in the Philippines na available po sa market. But what are the chances, Mr. Chair, that the same ink would be used for 2 or more acknowledgement receipts submitted by the Office of the Vice President? If you ask me, Mr. Chair, the chances are very, very low. Especially, Mr. Chair, kung titingnan nyo po, itong tinta na ito ay hindi mumurahin. Mahal po yan na ballpen. Hindi po yan common na ginagamit na ballpen. Ang mas kapanipaniwala, Mr. Chair, para sa akin, ay only one person probably made these acknowledgement receipts. And they are not the ones who received the funds as indicated in the acknowledgement receipts. Mr. Chair, my staff was also able to find acknowledgement receipts in different names. But the strokes o yung sinasabi po nating pagkasulat ng kanilang mga signatures signatures ito were identical. Dalawang different persons but the same identical strokes of signatures. Incidentally, Mr. Chair, these were all done on March of 2023. Moreover, Mr. Chair, the signatures all bear the same figure, done to 2 or 3 times. It's hard to believe, Mr. Chair, that such common signatures would appear like this. I admit that I'm not an expert in this kind of analysis, unlike those at the NBI, kasi sila naman po yung competent gumawa nito na examination. But based on what I know, Mr. Chair, these coincidences are too hard to ignore. In any event, Mr. Chair, ito pong committee na ito ay pinapasuri po natin yan sa NBI to make sure that these signatures are signed by the same person. Titingnan niyo mo po yan sa monitor, the same strokes, different persons. We also found out, Mr. Chair, that 2 acknowledgement receipts, both in the name of Milky Sikuya, both had done on the same day. Same po pinirmahan on the same day, same address in Zambales, and using the same pen. However, have totally different signatures. Tingnan niyo po, magkakaiba. The same day, the same date, same name, but different signatures. Tanong ko po, Mr. Chair, did the person who signed this receipt suddenly forget how they signed in the middle of the same day? Nagkamali ho siya, nakapirma pala siya, tapos pipirma ulit ng isang acknowledgement receipt? Di mo ba, pag naka-receive ka na, hindi ka na ho magpipirma at hindi ka namang mag-receive ng isang another acknowledgement or payment? It could have been acceptable, Mr. Chair, if there was merely a small variance between the signatures. Although, as we can see, these 2 signatures are wholly different from each other, which only leads to the conclusion, Mr. Chair, that whoever made these ARs was not actually this Milky Sikuya. This is truly mind-boggling, Mr. Chair, to say the least. Another, Mr. Chair, another character who we found is a certain Alice Crescencio. There were 3 different acknowledgement receipts in the name of one Alice Crescencio, submitted by the Department of Education in her name. Tatlo po yan na acknowledgement receipts from the same agency, Department of Education, bearing the same name. However, Mr. Chair, similar to our friend, tandaan niyo po si Kokoy Villamin na na-present po natin nung previous hearing. Similar to our friend Kokoy Villamin, Mr. Chair, there were 3 different signatures. Kapansin-pansin din po rito, Mr. Chair, na si Miss Alice, was apparently, according to these ARs, were in different parts of the Philippines. Pinirman niya, nung una, nasa Pasay City siya. Pangalawa, pumirma siya, nasa Iligan City, sa Mindanao. At doon po sa aking probinsya, sa Lanao del Sur. Pumirma din ho siya doon. Baka nandun din siya according to the acknowledgement receipt. So, itong pangalan po ito, Mr. Chair, it leaves a very questions, no? Kaya sabi ko, nanganganak ng tanong. Itong mga pangalan na po ito, Mr. Chair, ay hindi pangkaraniwan. Hindi ho natin masyadong naririnig ang Alice Crescencio. Hindi ho common name ito. Kung Maria, ano man yan, yun ang mga common name. But this is an uncommon name. And the chances are, what are the chances, Mr. Chair, that 3 different individuals, persons, have the same names and spelling? What are the chances, Mr. Chair? All receiving the same confidential funds for different purposes from the same agency, which is DepEd. Sobrang laking coincidence ito, Mr. Chair, which actually, it's a mind-boggling. Medyo po para sa akin, kung isipin po natin ito, medyo kalokohan. I'm sorry to use the term po. Medyo kalokohan na po ito. The more likely explanation na gusto ko pong isipin ay itong mga taga-pirma o tagagawa nitong mga ARs na ito ay hindi coordinated. Baka hindi ko sila nag-coordinate and they failed to probably overlook the possibility that they may use the same name. No, signing 3 different ARs from 3 different locations bearing gamit ang iisang pangalan, which is, in this case, Alice Crescencio. Mr. Chair, pero hindi po dyan nagtatapos ang mga kababalaghan ang nakikita natin sa acknowledgement receipts. Mr. Chair, it is also these representations. It's my privilege and honor, Mr. Chair, to introduce to you sina Miss Sally at si Miss Sheila. Magkakaibang pangalan po ito, Mr. Chair, at malamang magkakaibang tao. Kaya nga po sila magkaibang pangalan. Pero ano po ang kapansin-pansin, Mr. Chair? At ano ang napapansin natin rito sa pinipirmang acknowledgement receipts nila from DepEd as seen on the screen? Isa lang po ang pirma nila, si Miss Sally at si Miss Sheila. Kabaliktaran po ito ni Kokoy Villamin. Si Kokoy, parehong pangalan pero isa ang pirma. Kabaliktaran po ni Miss Sheila at Miss Sally. Magkaibang pangalan pero parehong pirma. These are 2 different persons, Mr. Chair, from 2 different addresses, I would assume. However, they have the exact same signature with exact same strokes. At baka isang tintang ballpen ang ginamit, Mr. Chair. At magkaibang lugar, Mr. Chair. Nandito po si Manong Johnny, taga Surigao din po siya. So it makes you think, Mr. Chair, that what are again the chances that once again the 2 different people from Digos City and Surigao City, being more than 400 kilometers away from each other, have the same exact name and the same signature. 2 people signing the same paper acknowledgement receipts, 2 different people signing with the same signatures in 2 different locations which are 400 kilometers apart from each other. Taga Mindanao po ako, so alam ko po yung gaano kalayo ang Digos at ang Surigao. For me, Mr. Chair, only 1 person did these acknowledgement receipts, but merely changed his handwriting style from print to script in writing, the name and the addresses, but also forgetting, Mr. Chair, probably to change the signature. Yun lang po ang aking naiisip na possible na answer. And because of this, Mr. Chair, I believe that this receipt was again merely fabricated. We have all been introduced to our new characters, Mr. Chair, si Alice, Crescencio, Milky Way si Kuya, Sally, and Miss Sheila. But let us not also forget our original friends na pinakilala ng committee na ito. One of the stars on the issue, Mr. Chair, of the confidential fund is one Mr. Kokoy Villamin. Ina-mention ko po sa inyo earlier, and this was also presented in the previous hearings. Mr. Kokoy Villamin, who happens to receive confidential funds from both the OVP and the DepEd. Kung maalala niyo po, Mr. Chair, si Mr. Kokoy Villamin ay ang isa sa mga unang napansin ng committee ito marahil sa kanyang kakaibang pangalan at sa magkaiba-ibang kanyang mga pirma. Napanood din po natin, Mr. Chair, at napanood ng committee ito ang interview kay PSA Assistant National Statistician Mariza Grande na tinitingnan nila ang pangalan niya sa kanilang records at isiniwalat niya na wala silang makitang records pertaining to Mr. Kokoy Villamin. This was brought about by the request of Congresswoman Jinky Luistro na para po ma-confirm natin na may talagang tao nito, we need to seek the assistance of PSA and NBI. Pero according sa kanila, wala po silang records na may tao pong Mr. Kokoy Villamin. According kay PSA na Assistant National Statistician na Mariza Grande. Base po sa kanilang initial na findings na ito ng PSA, mas panatag ako, Mr. Chair, na ang confidential funds na di umano'y binigay kay Mr. Villamin ay hindi talaga sa kanya napunta at hindi talaga itong totoong tao. I mean, common sense would dictate, Mr. Chair, that same name, bearing the same name, ay hindi po magkakaroon ng dalawang signatures. And it reinforces our original questions kung meron po bang mga taong ganito. Ang pinakabida, Mr. Chair, sa ating naging inquiry in aid of legislation, sa committee ito ay of course, si Miss Mary Grace Piatos. Thank you to Chairman Romy Acop. Siya po yung unang nakaobserba at na-notice po niya ang pangalan. Dahil yung pangalan pong ito, ang una nating napansin, at napansin ni Chairman Acop, dahil ito po ay kombinasyon, according to him, ng isang restaurant at chichirya. At tama na po, lahat po tayo nag-agree noon. Nung inaisiwalat sa committee ito ang acknowledgement receipt ni Miss Mary Grace Piatos, Kami ay tunay na mangha. Tayo po, hindi lang po tayo, ang buong bayan ng namangha. We reached out to the National Statistics Authority and inquired from them into whether this was a real person or a made-up character. We were likewise informed, Mr. Chair, that the NSA had no record of any person bearing the name of Mary Grace Piatos. There are certain personalities, Mr. Chair, who claim this Mary Grace Piatos were merely a code name, adding that in television and in movies, sa mga palabas at sa television, these code names are used for secret mission. But the fugitive, and I address to him directly in hiding, forgets that this is real life. Tunay po tayong nag-iimbestiga dito, hindi po ito television, hindi po ito palabas. That the people's money, earned through the hard work of every Filipino, should be scrutinized on how they were spent by our agencies. Mr. Chair, ang keyword, Mr. Chair, is transparency. Transparency is required kasi kailangan masilip ng otoridad, gaya ng COA, o kaya't ang taong bayan kung nasa tama ba ang paggastos ng kanilang pondo. In this particular case, the confidential funds. The PSA recently informed us, Mr. Chair, that our new friends, Mr. Kokoy Villamin, Ms. Milky Sikuya, and Ms. Alice Crescencio, are also all non-existent. Wala po silang record. Non-existent. Hindi po sila, according to PSA, ay posibleng hindi po ito mga tao. There is no record of their birth, no record of their marriage, contracts, whatsoever, or death. No, sana naman po, hindi death, no? Although we just want to leave no stone unturned. That's why we request them if they have a proof that would really prove an evidence of their existence. Birth, marriage, or even death certificates. Wala po, according to PSA. In fact, Mr. Chairman, of the 677 names from the DepEd acknowledgement receipts, which we submitted to the PSA for verification, para po patunayan na kung mayroon bang tao na ganito, the 677 names from the ARs, it was determined by the PSA, Mr. Chair, that only 405 of these ARs with these names have no record whatsoever. So malaki-laki po yung persyento, 677. Out of the 677, 405 ang wala pong verifikasyon at wala pong record ng PSA. So Mr. Chair, it is unlikely that all of these are merely code names, as some supposedly high-powered lawyer would claim, that this simply would not make sense from a legal standpoint, which we will discuss more, Mr. Chair, and from a practical perspective, since it would be an unbelievable, unimaginable amount of effort to do. Imagine, Mr. Chair, gumawa ka, mag-imbento ka ng ganyang karamihang pangalan. At let us go back to Alice Crescencio, if assuming without conceding that these are code names. Di ba pag mga code names po, ibig sabihin you somehow protect the real identity of the person. That's why you're using code names. Itatanungin ko po, ilang beses silang kumukuha ng code names sa sina-assign sa isang tao? Halimbawa, si Alice Crescencio, 3 beses pumirma sa magkakaibang lugar ng ARs. How would they find out if Miss Alice Crescencio is assigned to a particular person kung 3 beses nila itong ginamit? Kung tanamang, if assuming that what they're saying is true, how sloppy they are to work and assign 3 code names to 3, same code name to 3 different persons. Mr. Chair, under item 4.15.3 of the joint circular expressly requires that the SDO certify to the fact that such supporting documents for confidential funds are kept in a vault, while item 6.2.21 of the same joint circular requires that liquidation reports, along with supporting documents like the acknowledgement receipts, are required to be submitted in a sealed envelope. Ibig sabihin, ang sinasabi po dito sa joint circular, kinakailangan po na mag-certify ang SDO na may supporting documents ang confidential funds at nilalagay po sa vault para hindi po basta-basta may labas yan. At sinasabi din ho dito sa sa joint circular na ang liquidation reports ay dapat may supporting documents. Hindi lang po ang ARs, no? At nilalagay po yan sa sealed envelope. Ganun po kaimportante yan. Ang mga requirements po na ito, Mr. Chair, ay tiyak na alam ng mga staff po ng opisina ng Vice President at ng Department of Education. In fact, Mr. Chair, to prove that they know this circular, the requirement of this circular memorandum, sinabi po ni Ms. Gina Acosta, in a certification dated 10 January of 2022, certified si Ms. Acosta that the details and supporting documents relating to use of confidential funds are kept in safe. Sinabi po niya yan, na nilalagay po nila as a way to observe what is required of them to do. This includes, Mr. Chair, the acknowledgement receipt of Ms. Mary Grace Piatos, according to her. So ang tanong ko po, Mr. Chair, kung meron pong stricto ang joint circular na dapat ilagay sa safe, sa vault, the joint circular uses the term vault, no? And uses also the terms and the phrase supporting documents. E di para saan pa kaya ang security measures na ito sa joint circular kung code names lang din pala ang gagamitin? Bakit ilalagay pa sa envelope kung hindi naman sigurado na totoong tao yun kasi code name pala? Sa madaling salita, Mr. Chair, what is the use of the requirement under the joint circular of keeping records locked in a safe and transmitting them via an envelope marked confidential funds kung hindi pala tunay na tao? Kung code names yan, pwede mo naman po nakalagay yan sa mesa. Malay mo ba natin kung sino si Alice Crescencio? Ano ba ang tunay niyang pangalan? Diba? If we are really to protect their identity. So why there's a need for the joint circular to require the agency to keep it in a safe and then have acknowledgement receipt and then put it in a sealed envelope? If these receipts, Mr. Chair, actually used.
Actually, there are 3 safeguard. Number 1, it must be sealed. May nakalagay na confidential at dapat nakalagay sa vault.
Yes. And those 3 requirements were already confirmed by Ms. Gina Acosta, Mr. Chair, in the previous hearing. Mr. Chair, again, let me continue. If these receipts actually use code names, what is the point locking it in a safe, again, and secure the vault and secure it in the vault when the details therein have already been obscured or changed? Pinalitan na hindi niya tunay na identity. Halimbawa, si Congressman Paulo Ortega, ang kanyang code name ay si Magneto. Pwede naman dyan nakalagay dyan. Malay ba natin na si Magneto pala si Congressman Paulo Ortega? Mr. Chair, the interpretation offered by those who claim that code names can be used is patently absurd. I'm sorry to say this. And we in government, Mr. Chair, cannot and should not dabble with the absurd. Hindi dapat ito biro, hindi biro ang pinag-uusapan dito. Hindi lang naglalaro dito, Mr. Chair. Seryosong bagay po ito. Kaya nga po may joint circular kasi seryoso po ang gobyerno kung paano po nila nilalagay ang criteria kung paano gastusin po ang pondo ng taong bayan, ang pera ng ating mga kababayan. So hindi po ito dapat laro-laro at hindi po lang dapat itago sa mga code names. Furthermore, Mr. Chair, just because the issue involves confidential funds doesn't mean we can ignore, exploit, and essentially invent acknowledgement receipts, which under the joint circular are proof of payments. Paano po mapoprove na itong isang tao na ito, nagangalang ganito, ay nakatanggap dahil siya informant, kung ang nilalagay lang ho natin na acknowledgement receipts ay hindi niya pangalan or code name lang, Mr. Chair, Your Honors. How can we then confirm, especially COA, Mr. Chair, that the confidential fund actually went to the right person for the stated purpose if the amount can be claimed with a code name? Mr. Chair, how can the Commission Audit ensure that the agency who utilized confidential funds actually utilized it for its actual stated purpose? As allowing a code name, Mr. Chair, to me, just allows this, Mr. Chair, to be prone to abuse by just writing any name and calling it as such, Mr. Chair. And when accountability is required from the agency of the government, the inquiry will be brushed aside only on the basis of supposed confidentiality. Ganun po So we are actually weakening not only COA, but even this committee, the inherent right of this committee to exercise its oversight function. Para lang ho, Mr. Chair, to me, para lang ho itong biro-biro lamang lang. So I think those are the things that we need to consider and probably to propose a bill that would really secure the identity of the informants and as well as to prove that those informants really do receive the payments. Ilan lang po, Mr. Chairman, ito sa mga anomalyang napansin natin sa ating pag-imbestiga, sa mga documentary evidences of payment na isinumite ng Office of the Vice President at ang Department of Education para di umano'y magpapatunay sa paggamit ng confidential expenses nito. Sa aming mga kababayan, to my fellow Filipinos, I would wish that this committee's inquiry in aid of legislation with regard to the issues on confidential funds surrounding OVP and DepEd was understood. Pinapanalangin ko po, Mr. Chair, na maintindihan ito ang trabaho po natin at ginagawa po natin dito sa committee nito. Pinapanalangin ko na maintindihan ito ng ating mga kababayan. Dahil hindi po ito pondo ng isang taong pinag-uusapan. Hindi po biro ang pinag-uusapan dito. Hindi po madali ang mga na-involved na tao po dito. Ito po ang pinag-uusapan natin ay pondo po nila. Pera po ng taong bayan. And we want to make sure that whatever manners these funds are spent and utilized, it should ultimately be for the goal or objective of making their lives better. If we, Mr. Chair, as lawmakers, do not adhere to our duty to inquire with resource speakers which are aimed at addressing gaps in the law, we would not be able to pass bills to eventually become law to address these very gaps which are prone to abuse. Ang ginagawa po natin dito, at kung hindi natin ginagawa at ine-exercise ang ating oversight function, paano po tayo makakagawa ng batas para protektahan ang pera ng ating mga kababayan? This is exactly what we, Mr. Chair, this committee, as lawmakers, as legislators have done here. And this is the primary reason of why we have undergone numerous hearings in our inquiry in aid of legislation with regard to confidential funds without fear or favor. Mr. Chair, in closing, other than our goal of hopefully passing a bill to address these gaps in the law surrounding confidential funds so that this may not be abused again by those in power, we should not forget who facilitated this abuse, Mr. Chair. Sabi ko nga, hindi po madali itong investigasyon na ito dahil ang involved po ay matataas na opisyal ng ating gobyerno. There's only one person, Mr. Chair, in the middle of the issues surrounding the anomalous utilization of confidential funds of the Office of the Vice President and the Department of Education. Ang tinuturo po ng lahat na naging bisita po natin dito sa committee ito. The very last invitees na nag-appear po sa committee ito, ang Special Disbursement Officers ng Department of Education nung kapanahunan po niya at ng Office of the Vice President. Ito po yung inatasan under the Joint Circular Memorandum nung pag-disburse, paggamit ng confidential funds. Sila lang po ang merong kapangyarihan na mag-disburse at mag-implement nitong pondo na ito. At sila pong dalawa, ang sinabi po nila na nag-utos po sa kanila ay ating pangalawang Pangulo, Vice President Sara Duterte. Mr. Chair, wala pong personalan ito. Trabaho lang. Marami pong salamat. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.